All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Community Association transition. We're going to be diving right in today. My name is Melissa Wrubel. I am an engineer with Kipcon. I've been with Kipcon for, I guess, about 15 years now. Before this, I was more involved in the design end of the industry. Kipcon, I work a lot on transition, reserve study, design for remedial projects in which something needs to be replaced or repaired. And my specialty is in site work, but at Kipcon we have a lot of different disciplines. We have some structural engineers and some architects and some reserve specialists, a lot of people who work on transition studies and the types of services we'll be talking about today. There I am. I just gave you a bit of my CV, but as you can see, I've been in the industry for quite a while. I've done numerous transition studies over the years with Kipcon and reserve studies, initial reserve studies that are prepared in conjunction with transition studies, which we'll be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about several different topics that satellite around transition studies. We're going to talk first about some key concepts and talk about some terms that you'll be hearing quite often. We're going to talk about the risks involved for both developer and the association, what to expect during transition study, what is a reasonable expectation and what is not. We're going to talk about claims and litigation, and we're going to be talking about some of the dangers and pitfalls and some approaches to transition study that allow things to go smoothly, hopefully. So let's talk about transition study first and what it actually is. Transition is not an event that happens on a certain date or within just a short period of time. Transition starts when a developer decides that they are going to develop a community, and they will retain experts who, engineers and attorneys and a team of experts who will help them to develop some design documents, some governing documents if it's going to be a multifamily community or a community association of some type. And they use those documents to go through the approval process, the municipal, county, and state approval process. And then once that all those design documents are go through the approval process and they have the clearance to build, the construction actually takes place and may continue for a year or sometimes more in larger communities where the construction is being executed in phases. It can take several years for that construction process to complete. And then once a certain number of units is sold within the community, it's typically around 75%. The developer who sits on the board up to that point begins to turn over the governance of the community to a board that consists of unit owners within the community. So that's usually the time at which a community association will engage with an engineer and an attorney and experts for themselves to evaluate the construction that has taken place. And then once you've gotten through the transition process and there is amicable settlement between the developer and the association that now consists of unit owners within the community, then you are an independent community. So the transition process, as we just discussed, is the evolution. It's an evolution. It's not just a singular event. So it can often take place sometimes over several years. And it is the mechanism turning over from the developer or the sponsor over to the homeowners as the community becomes filled with homeowners. So what are the phases we just discussed? Document development. So this includes not just the design documents, which are very important to the transition study evaluation that your engineer will do, which we'll discuss, but it's also the time when the governing documents of the community are also being developed, and also the budgets. As we'll see, this plays into the reserve study that the community will have, which is their budgetary document that they will use moving forward in their community. Phase two we discussed is construction, in which the actual building of the community occurs. So those design documents that were used in the beginning to go through the approval process, once they're approved, the developer is going to build the community in conformance with those design documents. Stage three, the turnover, as we discussed, typically when 75% of the units have been sold. And then also the final turnover when there is an independent community. Homeowners are in full control of their community. All right, let's discuss some key concepts and terms. So when you are undertaking a transition study and a reserve study, the focus is on the common and limited common elements. So the general common elements, in Pennsylvania, they're often referred to as the common facilities, are those elements that are the responsibility of when you purchase a home in a community association, you are also joining a community association. The association is responsible for the replacement and maintenance of the general common elements. Those general common elements are used by all. So just by way of an example, they may be common open space areas, a clubhouse, a pool. They're used by all unit owners. So that community association that all homeowners belong to have a financial responsibilities for those general common elements and a responsibility to keep them maintained. And when they have reached the end of their useful life, they're responsible to replace those common elements. Limited common elements are those that are typically used by a unit owner or a group of unit owners, but not all unit owners. But those common elements may be, or sorry, limited common elements uh, are typically those that are also either to be maintained by the association or also replaced by the association. So some examples of those may be unit entry walks that serve a condominium unit, or a balcony, a door deck covering on a balcony, for example. So even though one unit owner is using those, maybe multiple unit owners have those common elements, and each unit owner is using their own, but the association would be responsible to maintain and replace those if your governing document states that is the case. So why is this discussion of transition important? Well, all residential homes in the United States make up about the homes within community associations make up about 24% of all residential homes. All new homes being constructed at the moment, and I believe these statistics may have changed, maybe a little higher now, as this slide was probably prepared about 5 years ago. But generally, this will give you the idea. All new homes that are currently being constructed, about 80% of those are within a community association. So across the U.S., there are a large number of homes and units that are within community associations. So this concept of a transition study of turning over something that's a community association that's constructed by a developer to multiple unit owners is something that's taking place more and more. So there are different types of associations, and what they're called may vary depending on where you live and what kind of community that you live in. But in general, some types of homeowner associations are condominium associations for one, and these types of associations have multiple units in each building, and in some cases, not all, those multiple units may be within a condominium association, in which case the building, the facade of the building, the roof of the building, oftentimes the foundation, and maybe some other elements within the building are within those general common elements that we discussed, or within those limited common elements. Another type is a homeowners association, and this may be a large site or perhaps a smaller site in which single family homes exist, or perhaps even townhomes exist. Again, a multi-unit, multiple units in a single building. However, those units each may sit on their own individual lot, or the definition of the unit may also encompass the building in some way and some elements of the site. So in a homeowners association, those those general common elements are typically limited to those elements that the entire community is responsible for, such as stormwater management facilities or open space areas, recreation areas, things of those type. Oftentimes there are communities that are constructed as mixed use. I see this a lot in Pennsylvania, where there are several types of association structures on a single piece, on a single tract. So there may be a mix of single family homes on individual lots. There may be some condominium buildings or some townhome buildings that are part of the same development. Oftentimes you'll see with mixed use a master association that is separate from the homeowner and condominium association, which is responsible for open space areas that are shared by all. So there can be several different types of configuration of community associations. One of the items that is prepared at the time of the transition study is a reserve study. So a reserve study, as is it commonly used, is a budgetary planning tool for it's a forward look for the association for how they will fund for replacement of the general and limited common elements as their governing documents dictates. So I want to differentiate that from the reserve that is prepared at the time of the governing documents. So we talked about how at the beginning of that transition cycle, the developer will prepare a setting of governing documents, and oftentimes there is a amount stated within those documents for reserve at the time that it's prepared. So just say, for example, the developer prepare those documents in, say, 2020. Every community is different, obviously, but for by way of example, we'll use 2020. So let's say that the community actually began construction in 2021 or 2022. So it becomes obvious that that reserve that was prepared by the developer, that reserve statement, is based on design documents, not actual construction. But they need a structure in place in which when homeowners purchase a home, they can look and they can say, oh yes, here are the common elements and the limited common elements, and here's what the developer believes that we will need to reserve each year for contribution into a reserve fund so that we can replace these in the future. Now, for larger phase developments, the developer, as the community is being constructed, will oftentimes update that reserve statement over time in amendments to those governing documents. However, when the developer is turning over the community to association control of the unit owners are going to want to do their own study, an initial full reserve study that is based on the actual construction of the community. So I want to make that differentiation. The developer is preparing a reserve statement that's based on the design documents for an unconstructed community, the association will want to prepare a full reserve study that's based on what is actually constructed, and it is for their use moving forward. You will always need to have some form of a reserve study in place so that you can make budgetary decisions as an association. So you're going to update that reserve study periodically as the community ages so that you will have adequate funding to make those replacements. So you'll see there after turnover from the developer, you're going to want to do an update reserve study with site visit, meaning that when you hire a reserve preparer, they're going to want to visit the site. They're going to want to look at the condition of those components as the community ages and update your reserve study appropriately. You never stop having a reserve study. You always need one so that you have adequate funding. So the developer is going to have their own engineer. When you go through, when the association goes through transition, they're going to hire their own engineer who represents the association. But when the developer is preparing those design documents and all those operational manuals and the budgetary items, and as construction is moving forward, they may have inspections done. That is the developer's engineer. So I just want to differentiate the developer's engineer from the association's engineer as we move through transition study. The association's engineer, you're going to hire them to prepare the transition study. And the goal of a transition study is to take those design documents. We always need the design documents. The transition engineer always needs those design documents because the basis of what's happening during a transition study is we're looking at those design documents, we're looking at what is constructed, and we're saying, does the construction generally conform to what the approved design is for the community? And again, your association's transition engineer is also going to prepare that initial full reserve study because you will need to know what that budget is. You want an adequate budget to replace your common and limited common elements as you move forward. So these are the two documents that are being prepared by the association's engineer, the transition study and the reserve study for the community. So a transition team for the association consists of a number of members. So oftentimes when transition starts, there may be a seat on the board that is still taken up by somebody who is representative of the developer, the sponsor. This may change as things move forward, but sometimes that's just based on how things unfold. There may be a seat on the board that is taken up by that representative. There's a property manager who manages the association. There is an attorney, a transition attorney. Sometimes an accountant gets involved in terms of analyzing the reserves, and also the engineer. So let's talk about what the transition study, the purpose of the transition study, and what it actually achieves. So what we need when we start a transition study, as I mentioned, is we need those design documents. So if there are buildings that are included within your common or limited common elements, we would need those architectural plans. For site work, things like stormwater management and sidewalks and retaining walls, things of that nature, we would need the engineering plans for that, the approved engineering plans. Because again, to reiterate, we are taking those plans and we're comparing them to the actual construction. We're saying, do these two generally conform? Also, any kind of specifications. Sometimes especially for architectural plans, there may be written specifications as well. So the architectural plans may be, the set of those contract drawings may be may generally govern the construction, but the specifications, oftentimes written specifications, maybe give specific information regarding the components within those buildings and what needs to be built. Again, the governing documents, the declaration, the bylaws. So we're also looking for workmanship. We'll talk about that later, but also any manufacturer standards. So sometimes the architectural plans may call out just generally, say a roof, for example, to put on, say, a shingle roof on a building. But the roof that's actually installed may be maybe from a certain manufacturer. So if there are documents regarding um, uh, what the manufacturer's guidelines are for the installation of that particular component, those are helpful to us in transition as well when we're preparing the transition study. So when we are actually preparing the transition study, we're looking not only at the approved design drawings, but there may be some other performance standards that we're looking at when we're comparing the construction to the design drawings. So we're also looking at, although we're not doing specifically a code review, and I'll explain why in a minute, we are looking at building codes. If we look at the design drawings and we see that something is not constructed in conformance with the design drawings, we're going to look at the building code as well to see what does the building code say about that. One example is, say, flashing at a water table. So the design drawings might be silent about how that flashing is to be constructed, but that doesn't mean there's no standard for it. The building codes will oftentimes have a specific standard for how something should be constructed. And so we'll take a look at the building codes. We'll also look at the manufacturer's literature. So for something like a stone veneer, the stone manufacturers have very specific guidelines as to how their particular component is to be installed. So we would take a look at those as well. We look at performance standards. One example is in the case of stormwater management facilities. If you live in New Jersey or Pennsylvania, there are specific best management practices that are and rules, stormwater management rules that are in place for, say, for example, drain down time of a detention basin. So typically a detention basin will have 72 hours to drain after the end of a storm event. That is one of the performance standards that we will often take a look at when we are reviewing the construction. Sometimes we will refer to the regulations governing new home warranties. Now, I want to take this moment to differentiate unit owner responsibility from association responsibility. So when we're hired to do, or any engineer is hired to perform a transition study, it's important to keep in mind that the client is the association. So the governing documents will define what the unit owner is responsible for versus what the association is responsible for. So when we are doing a transition study and we have the association as a client, we are looking specifically at those components that are the responsibility of the association. So we're not looking at components that are the responsibility of individual unit owners. But however, those components are covered under the warranty, your homeowner warranty. But there are specific guidelines for builders that sometimes we will make reference to if there is a similar component that falls under the association's purview. So we will take a look at that. And then, of course, when we're preparing the reserve study, we are looking at the standards for preparing those reserve studies, whether they are the national standard for that preparation or the state standards. As you know, there are standards now that are specific to New Jersey for reserve studies. And when we are preparing a reserve study, and you're in New Jersey or whatever state you're in, we're also looking at the state requirements for preparation of that reserve study and proceeding accordingly. So after the reserve study is prepared, and you're going through the settlement process with the developer, there may be some other ancillary services that are required as you move towards settlement. So we're going to talk about those in a minute, like such as preparation of a cost estimate. When is it appropriate to do that? We don't typically do that at the initial transition study stage. Detailed cost estimates tend to be a little more expensive to prepare, especially if there are a lot of components that are deficient. And there is a time and a place to prepare that cost estimate. We may want to do if there are buildings that are included and there's evidence of water infiltration into the wall assembly, for example, we may recommend that moisture probes be done as a follow-up. Um, you may require some remedial design for something that is a component that may be deteriorated because of the way something was constructed. There may be other types of invasive testing that may need to be performed. Say, for example, the moisture tests show that there are levels of moisture within a wall assembly that indicates that there is free water, meaning that there is actual standing water within that assembly. We may recommend doing invasive testing where we actually come in with a contractor and start to remove some of those components so we could see what's actually going on inside the wall. Oftentimes there may be, if there's active moisture within a wall, there may be framing damage within that wall. We can't really tell the extent of that until we do invasive testing. So my point in showing you this slide is there may be services that are required beyond the initial transition study to reveal what the extent of damages may be that may be required. So as we can see, the governing documents define what the common and limited common elements are, also defines what the maintenance and reserve responsibilities of the association versus what the unit owners are, where the association is responsible, that drives the budget requirements for your community. So here's an example just of some of that invasive testing. This doesn't happen in every transition. These I understand can be scary pictures, but this can happen during transition. It doesn't happen during all. But just by way of example, if we do have to do invasive testing where we start to remove components, what we're looking for is internal damage. But one of the key concepts I want to touch on is consequential damage. So insurance money doesn't come into play unless the deficient construction of one component damages another component. So in this case, the deficient construction of the flashing, perhaps at the water table, has allowed water to come in and do some damage to the underlying framing. We can see some rot in this bottom left picture here where water has gotten in. It looks like at some where the vinyl siding, where there was penetrations through the siding, the water had gotten into the wall assembly and had done some damage to the internal framing. So in just by way of example for this key concept of consequential damage, because the flashing wasn't constructed properly, where it came through the vinyl siding and the sheathing, the exterior sheathing, another component not related to the vinyl siding was damaged. It was consequential damage from the deficient construction of another component. Okay, so before we go on, I'm going to move rather quickly through the rest, just for the sake of time. But I want to stop here and see, does anyone have any questions about what we discussed so far? And you can type them right into the chat if you want. Okay, so when we get to the end, I'll open up for Q&A at the end as well. So let's talk about some of the risks. So deficient construction and inadequate budget are the two things that drive most claims. So for the association, when you buy into a community, you are buying before oftentimes the transition has taken place. So you don't have an opportunity to evaluate the construction until after you've already moved in. So expectations tend to run high. Oftentimes when you move into a community, you're given a very long set of construction documents, but you're also given a very nice brochure that might explain what's in the community. There's oftentimes an expectation by homeowners that everything is going to be constructed perfectly, and when they go through transition, um, there should be a pristine bill of health, or else the developer has just done everything wrong. That is not a good expectation to have. So when the developer sets out to construct something, they want to do a good job. If you've got a quality developer that has constructed your community, they want to do a good job. They want you to be happy. So whenever there's a deficiency, um, if it's truly a construction deficiency that is going to cause the association heartache down the road, a good developer is going to want to alleviate that somehow. There are several ways that they can do that, several offerings they can make to the association. But so what makes the risk so high in going through the transition process? Again, homeowner expectations. Also, lack of education in terms of what the transition study is meant to accomplish. Again, keeping in mind that our or any transition engineers client is the association. So oftentimes homeowners will say, we all have this problem with this component, but it's not an association component. Can you put it into the transition study? I always advise against that because the unit owner has their own warranty. If you have a a problem with something within your unit that is not the responsibility of the association to maintain, you're going to want to go through the developer's warranty. Again, you're moving into the community as it's being constructed, or sometimes after construction. So there could be some poor construction that's concealed. Poor document development is something I see from time to time, in which the components, the common and limited common components, are not fully defined. So that can make a bit of a gray area for some communities. A lot of times a developer, while the community is being constructed, they will engage with a third party firm to come in and just watch and evaluate as the construction is being constructed, so that anything that's concealed, in the end, there will be documentation of the construction that when you purchase that as a homeowner, that's concealed. But that doesn't always happen. I would say in most cases that does not happen. So you don't have that documentation as to what is, for example, in the internal wall assembly, or the concealed plumbing, things of that nature. So let's talk about some different types of deficient construction that we might typically see. Um, during a transition study. So there are some items that might be big ticket items. There are some items that are smaller items, but let's just look at some examples. So during document development for the developer, when they are designing the community and the buildings and what's going to be built, sometimes there may be some details that are either the design plans are silent about, or they're not heavily detailed. And so sometimes this happens between areas where there may be different disciplines that are constructing items, for example, the framing and the exterior facade. There may not be adequate detail on the plans that say how to construct that, so that um, when the next subcontractor comes in, there's kind of a gray area between who might do, for example, flashing, or who might be responsible to construct an area in a certain way that there's adequate moisture evacuation to the exterior of the building. And those areas, sometimes they don't get constructed as they should because of that lack of communication between disciplines and the silence of the design documents. And you may get water infiltration in those areas. And you see on the far left there, this is one of those types of areas. You see there's a lot of vertical walls coming together. You have an alcove area with a soffit, and the area may not have been detailed very well. And we have this event with this water infiltration. Here we've done some invasive investigation where we've removed the facade, and unfortunately water has gotten in. So there's some repairs that need to be done. And sometimes the construction, whatever's constructed, might not match what is constructed in the field. Now there's two things that can happen. So if something's not constructed as per the plans, it may be a deficiency. It may cause a deficiency. Sometimes something's not constructed as per the plans. However, it may be what we call either an equivalent or a betterment. It may be that during construction, as sometimes happens, because keep in mind, when an engineer is designing the site, they don't have the benefit of seeing what's going on during construction. So oftentimes during construction, there may be some field changes that need to happen because what was designed for that area, there may be some unforeseen condition, they need to do something else. So there may be some design changes along the way. So even though it doesn't match what is in the design document, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a deficiency that's going to cause damage. But you need somebody who's an expert sometimes to look at the difference and decide whether, yes, this is equivalent, or this is better than what was designed because it's going to perform better in the long run. However, there are times when the construction does not match, and it's not a good thing. So here's an example, just this inlet here. This looks like a Pennsylvania site, just based on the type of top unit that's on that catch basin. You can see that it's not the area around the catch basin. First of all, the top, the type of top that's put on this particular catch basin is for a curb. It's not for an open area. It's also looks like that the grade around the structure is not properly completed. That any water that's moving over the surface is not going to make it there. So we would certainly call this out during a transition study. Okay, we talked about improperly installed flashing. A lot of times that is the source of water infiltration into a building. As I mentioned before, a lot of proprietary facade materials, such as an adhered stone veneer to the exterior, or even vinyl siding and roofing, they will have their own installation guidelines. So it's important that even though the plans don't show that, don't show those specific, very detailed ways of constructing things, there are manufacturer standards that are very detailed that need to be followed as well. Let's talk about poor workmanship. So there may be times when we're looking at construction. We can see that, yes, it's constructed. They constructed what's shown on the plans. The concrete's 4 inches thick. There's stone underneath it. It's broom finished, but there may be it may be a case where there are aesthetic concerns because of poor workmanship. This very often happens with large areas of concrete sidewalk. When large community associations are being constructed, the concrete contractor is moving very, very quickly, and the crews may be tempted to overwork the concrete, to improperly hydrate the concrete, not because they intend to, but because they're moving so quickly. these things may occur. So that's a case of poor workmanship. So there may not be a standard to refer to in a transition study when we're looking at poor workmanship, but what we can do is we can look at examples of good workmanship and compare the bad workmanship to the good workmanship. And like I said, oftentimes it comes down to an aesthetic evaluation, not so much a structural evaluation of something. But again, you want a community that is attractive. Just by way of example, I had a case recently where an approach to the clubhouse. They had a very nice sort of decorative concrete that was approaching the main entrance to the clubhouse. However, because of the way the concrete, everything was constructed the way it said on the plans, but because of the way the concrete cured, it had a mottled appearance, and they were not happy with it. So that was a workmanship issue. Again, we talked about lack of coordination between architectural designs and engineering drawings. One area that this can happen very often is with roof drainage. Sometimes the downspouts are exiting to an area where um, they need to be adjusted. The exit point need to be adjusted to work well with the grading plans. And here again, just by way of deficient construction, some other things that we talked about. Sometimes there are materials that are specified that are difficult to install, um, or they require attention to detail that when construction is moving quickly doesn't always happen. So these are areas where we may often find deficient construction. So going back to reserve studies, and I'm just going to touch upon this quickly just because of time. I explained the difference before, but between the reserve statement that the developer prepares for the governing documents versus the full reserve study that the association prepares for their use for budgetary purposes moving forward as their community ages. So sometimes there's a disparity between those two. And again, when you are doing a full reserve study as an association, you're comparing it to what's actually constructed. You want to fund for what's actually constructed, which may differ sometimes, not always, but may differ from what was actually designed to be constructed. So you want to take a look and you want to compare those reserves. So what we can do is we can take that forward-looking reserve study and we can take a backward look, if you will. And again, I used my example of documents that were prepared in 2020 with maybe you're going through transition in 2025, 2026 when your full reserve study is prepared. So what we could do is take a backward look and we take that prepared reserve study for 2025, 2026. We take a backward look, we convert that into 2020 terms, and we compare that to the developer statement of what the reserves were. So we're taking kind of like we're not doing an audit of everything that was spent by the developer. We're not that's more in the realm of an accountant, but we're taking kind of just in terms of the common components and what was being reserved for in 2020 versus what was being reserved for in 2025, 2026. We're comparing those and we're looking where all the components accounted for. Do the costs for replacement generally you know conform to what they should have been. So we're taking just a kind of a general look at that. I will tell you that I have never worked on a transition study where we've taken that backward look and everything matches perfectly. And there may be reasons for that are explainable. Sometimes they're not, and there's a deeper dive that's required. But inadequate reserves, oftentimes, if it will, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but occasionally will play into a deficiency claim that you may have. Let's talk about expectations. Again, as I mentioned, um, in a perfect world, there would be no construction deficiencies, no budgetary deficiencies. But I have never done a transition study where there weren't at least a few items or at least a slight variation between the full reserve study and the developer's reserve study. It is not uncommon. So if you're expecting that your community will have absolutely nothing to report, it's never happened that I know. So again, a quality developer will recognize that, and you can discuss that with the developer moving forward. So you want to keep things amicable with the developer. Um, Things can get confrontational when expectations of the association are unreasonable, such as I just mentioned that there should be an absolutely clean bill of health, or else the discussion goes south. So it's important to keep the lines of communication open, and to discuss in an amicable way what deficiencies exist and what remedy you can seek from the developer. When Kipcon does a reserve study, I'm sorry, a transition study, we are our goal is to be objective in what we are reporting. So when you're going to hire an engineer and you're going to hire an attorney, hopefully for transition. So the engineer, his responsibility or her responsibility is to report objectively and to deal in the facts and to look at what the standard is for things that are being constructed. So whenever Kipcon does a transition study, the deficiencies, every deficiency that we report in a transition study has a standard of performance. You'll remember that hierarchy slide that I introduced earlier, in which we're looking first and foremost at the design plans. Then we're looking at the building code, where the design plans are silent. We're looking at performance standards. We're looking at manufacturer specifications. We're looking at the quality of the workmanship. So for each deficiency we're identifying, there's a standard. So we're being very objective in our approach to what we're reporting in the transition study. So when the transition study is finalized and prepared, your attorney will submit that to the developer. The developer is going to be given a chance to respond to those deficiencies item by item as they are reported in the transition study. So you want to be objective. You want to have a standard to point to for every deficiency that you are reporting. So once the developer is given a chance to respond, they're going to typically respond in one of three ways. They're going to say, we do not agree. We think everything is constructed as it should be. There's no problem. We're not going to do anything. Or they're going to say, you are absolutely right. We recognize that this is not constructed as it should be. We're going to fix it. We're going to come in. We're going to physically fix it ourselves. Or another way they may respond is by saying, you're right. We recognize that there's a problem here, but we're going to give you money. We're not going to fix it, but we're going to give you money so that you can hire your own contractors and you can have that fixed yourself. So this is where the claim evaluation comes in. So once the developer has responded, um, again, he's going to come back with one of those three responses, and you're going to have to take a look at uh, for big ticket items, especially, you're going to look at what would this cost the association if A, the developer doesn't fix it, or B, he's offering to give us money to fix it, but how do we know that's enough? So that's when a cost estimate comes in. So you want to look at what also not only your cost estimate, but what are your strong positions, and what are your weak positions. So strong positions are where we spoke about where the design deviates, but it's not equivalent. Remember, we talked about an equivalent or a betterment. So where the design deviates and it's not equivalent and it's causing problems, that's a strong position. Where something deviates from the code, where we look, the plans are silent, so we look at the building code. What does the building code say? But maybe it's not even constructed in conformance, it's in violation of the building code. That's a strong position. Safety issues, trip hazards, problems with fire suppression systems, where life safety issues are part of the deficiency set. That's a strong position. Wherever there's damage, say we've done moisture testing, we've done invasive, and there is internal damage, say, for example, to the wall assembly, that's a very strong position. Weak positions are where again, there's something is equivalent. You've been given something in its place, but it's not causing damage. It's not a burden on the association to maintain. It may even be a betterment. It may be a material that requires less maintenance moving forward. One of the it says in here minor drainage, even if it exceeds the standards. So there are times when there may be, especially if you are constructed on a low-lying site, there are times when there are drainage deficiencies that cannot be resolved because you are adjacent, say, to wetlands, or there's a high water table. I don't want to get into that too much here because there are some nuances to that problem. But if it's a situation where the drainage cannot be resolved, it might be a weak position. But again, I don't want to get into that here. That is more of fall under the specifics of your transition study. So cost estimates, as I mentioned, cost estimates, detailed cost estimates for settlement purposes can be expensive to prepare, especially if you have a lot of components that are deficient, or if you have big ticket items that are deficient. That to decide what the scope of work is and thus prepare a cost estimate would require some further testing. So you want to wait till the developer responds to see what the developer agrees needs to be taken care of. So again, keeping in mind those three responses from the developer, what the developer says, yes, we agree, this is a problem, we're going to fix it. You could take that off the table. You don't need to worry about a cost estimate. Of course, you want to go back and make sure that they have of course, remediated what the issue is. You could take that off of the cost estimate. So the other items where the developer says, no, we're not going to repair it, you want to see what the cost will be if you need to repair it yourself, and also if they're offering to give you money. The cost for a developer to repair something is typically less than what it's going to cost the association to repair that very same component. So you want to make sure that what the developer is offering you is adequate. So once you take a look at what the aggregate costs are for remediating or curing those deficiencies are, you want to make a business decision. And again, this is where your attorney comes in that can give you some guidance on what the risks are in pursuing litigation. Litigation is very, very expensive. There are alternative ways to settlement, and that's more in the legal realm. So I won't touch on that here. But again, you want to make a unemotional business decision on the viability of moving forward with any kind of litigation. So in preparing for litigation, again, it's expensive. Why is it expensive? You've got to prepare the cost estimates, which are subject to change as you do further investigation. The cost for your experts in the litigation to prepare reports is expensive. Any further testing that needs to happen it can often escalate, especially if there is internal damage to, say, a wall assembly, and you need to investigate what the extent of that damage is. That testing, there's a price tag to that, and for the association to do that testing, that cost is borne by the association. That's not borne by the developer. So as you can see, as you want to keep things amicable, because when things become confrontational, it can get expensive. So let's talk about the dangers. So here's a real life scenario. There was a $9 million construction claim. So we'll see what the risks are for the developer and the association if there is litigation. So transition study was done, developer responded, a defect claim was prepared, a dollar claim, and the association filed suit, and the litigation begins. So the developer is going to bring in their team of experts. The association is going to bring in their team of experts, neither of which is inexpensive. And then the developer brings in their subcontractors, the insurance companies get involved. Each of the subcontractors also retains an expert team for themselves. So in this particular case, the association spent 1.5 million on legal fees. They spent 1.5 million on engineering experts to prepare reports, cost estimates, do testing. And you could see the association costs total 3 million to go through litigation. This is before this is no guarantee of a settlement, anything like that. So the developer, they are going to retain their own team. And as you can see, for their experts, their legal expense, everything, the total defense cost 5.5 million. So when you look at what the association and what the developer spent on maintaining their experts to get through litigation, total 9 million. The total claim amount was 9 million. So you could see that there's a risk to this. So when you go through, so let's look at the association. The association has spent 3.5 million in this particular case to settle a $9 million claim. They still got, once they get that claim, they still have to pay their experts. So they're risking essentially the 3.5 million against a 9 million claim that there is no guarantee they're going to win. Same thing happens on the developer side. They're putting out a substantial expenditure to defend against a very large claim. So there are risks involved here. All right, so we're coming down to the last couple of minutes. I'm just going to roll through these slides very, very quickly. So again, there are alternatives that you can discuss the viability with your transition attorney. There are different, maybe different ways of approaching settlement with the developer. I'm going to skip past this because we're not presenting to developers. All right, and this is just about RFPs. I am going to conclude here just for the sake of time, and I'm going to open it up. We've got about 3 minutes left because I want to end on time. We're down to the last couple of slides here anyway. Are there any questions regarding what I've presented today that I can answer for you or try to answer?
Hello, good morning. How are you?
Fine.
One of the questions that I have is when I'm listening, I've done many transition studies. One thing that you did not mention, once unit owners, let's take that it's a 14 floor condominium high rise, and there was a problem from the roof and it reached a couple of the units on the seventh, fifth, and fourth level. We go back, we found out that it's a problem from the construction or wasn't done correctly. You referred a lot to the flashing.
Right.
At
Right.
this point though, now we have a unit owner that's occupying that space. In normal life, damage to the unit is the owner's responsibility. Can you talk really quickly
Mhm.
about damage caused from construction to the unit and fiduciary responsibility for that damage to the occupied unit?
Right. So if there is a common element that is deficient and it's causing damage to an interior unit, that is not the responsible of the responsibility of the association. Again, I don't want to, you want to refer to your governing documents and legal advice in some cases. However, typically, if there is damage to the interior of the unit, and I come across this quite a bit, where there are as you mentioned, you are in a condominium building, sometimes those units that are right under a flat roof or a green roof, if the flashing or the membrane is not done correctly, there may be water infiltration that comes in and actually does damage to the interior of the unit. In my experience, the that was rolled into the claim because the damage was not isolated to what a unit owner owned, but it was caused by a common element that that the association would ultimately be responsible for. So again, I would refer you in your specific case to your governing documents on that. But in my experience, that has been also part of the damage claim.
Okay, one last question. When you receive all the documents from the builder, is it not appropriate to receive all the documents of all the subs that worked during the time of construction? In other words, were they the correct person? Did they have their certificate of insurance? Were they actually roofers? And uh, it- do you get my point?
Right. So that may happen as transition. We during the initial transition study, we don't ask for all those documents. However, if there is a deficiency and things escalate, uh, we would eventually ask for those documents. So
Okay.
yes, that can play a role in it. One of the things I just want to bring up here, I've got some other comments coming up
Okay.
on
Sorry.
the board. No, 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 that's okay. Those are all great questions that, yes, I did not get an opportunity to touch on. One of the things I want to bring up is we have George Great Rex here with us today. He's an attorney, a transition attorney I've done some work with. He brings up a very good point. He said, note that the cost of litigation, attorney fees and expert fees are usually not recoverable from the other party, so you cannot include them in the damage claim. He says most judges will rule that each party bears its own cost, called the American rule. So I just want to put that
Wow.
out as well.
Thank you for that. That's important to me personally to
Okay,
understand.
great,
Thank you.
great.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, let me just see if there's any other. Can reserve studies take into account an HOA's assessment cap for determining their contributions to the fund? Um, I am not sure of the answer to that, and I do apologize, Anastasia, but I don't know the answer to that one.
Melissa, it's George. The new reserve law does not allow rules in your governing documents to prevent the appropriate funding of your reserve account. So if there's an assessment cap, meaning I
Mm,
think what the person means is that our board isn't able to increase assessments more than a certain amount every year, that does not
mm.
apply to the reserve contribution.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
We have another one where I realize we're going over. I'll continue to just look through the Q&A here, but this does conclude our presentation for today. If you wanna stay for the Q&A, that's absolutely fine. I'll just continue. Um, let's see. From gentleman here, you reference approved design drawings, which I assume means approved by the regulatory agencies. That's correct. Developers then often prepare construction drawings that show more information needed to build something is shown on the construction drawings, but not the design drawings. Do you feel developers should provide these additional items? Yeah, I think that when the document request is happening for transition, we are requesting whether the association or the attorney is requesting the design drawings. What we're looking for is all the information that is relevant to the construction of that community. So if there are approved design changes that have happened along the way, those are really critical to what we're doing, because otherwise it's going to look like it wasn't constructed in conformance with the design plans. So if there was an approved design change, that would be very helpful to us at the initial transition stage.
Could I quickly follow up on that question?
Yeah.
So I guess what I mean is initially you prepare design drawings. That's something sufficient to get your regulatory approvals. Once that's done, then developers will typically prepare construction level drawings. So for instance, structural details don't need to be part of the initial design drawings. It would go to a planning board or some state agency.
Right.
So those construction level drawings show more information than what the drawings that went to the regulators did, what the approved drawings are. So my question is, if now these construction drawings show more information, but it's not on the quote unquote approved design drawings, which happened prior to the development of the construction drawings, is there an expectation when you're doing a transition study that those additional items need to be provided by the developer? We're going through a transition study now, and the developer's position is all we're responsible for is the approved design drawings. If we later put together construction level drawings, and those construction level drawings show additional things. Quick example is wheel stops in the parking areas. Was it on the approved design drawings, construction level drawings, they put those on. That's a quick example. Their position is, well, it wasn't on the approved drawings, even though it's on our construction level drawings approved afterwards. We're not responsible for any of those additional things that are shown on CD level drawings.
In my opinion, they are. I mean, if those this happens a lot with retaining walls. And yes, to your point, if
Correct. Right.
construction drawings exist, I think they should be provided. This happens a lot with retaining walls as well, where it shows a retaining wall on the engineering design plans, which is great. But I mean, how was it meant to be constructed? What's the drainage behind the wall supposed to look like? How are the ends supposed to be terminated? So we'll request those drawings, those
Yeah.
construction drawings. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Can I
Sure.
chime in one more time then, reference this gentleman's question? At the end of the day, aren't we supposed to receive as-built with the changes that were approved along the way?
Again, if they are available, so keep in mind, we're going to request these documents from the association. What the developer provides to the association may not be what we're requesting. So if we believe that the documents are deficient in some way, we will recommend that the association try to obtain those drawings. So we can start a transition study with the design drawings. But then, if we see that something is like trust, we need to say trust drawings. We've got architecturals, but we don't have any trust drawings. We may request that. So again, they're always helpful to us if they are available for review, and the developer has provided them to the association. They should be provided to us. Let's see. Okay. That looks like all the questions I have here. And look, if you have any further questions, please contact us. I'm happy to chat with you about this. But yeah, thank you very much for attending today. And I guess if you are attending for CEU credits, Jen is here.
You're the certified book for them?
I'm sorry?
Would you? That would be awesome.
Oh, I guess that's not a conversation for us.
A lot of the pictures I have, you have.
But I put my email address and Chelsea's email address in the chat, so you can reach out to either one of us or both of us, and we will send you your certificate and proof of attendance. And if you have any questions, you can send them to us, and we'll forward to Melissa.
I do anywhere from
connect
20
you.
to 25.
Hey, Jen, this is
Yeah.
Monica Meserek.
I
Thank you
started
so
one,
much
but
for getting me in on time. I appreciate
Of
it.
course.
Would you like
No
to add
problem. My
captions? I'll
pleasure.
save it if you want to add some captions to it.
All right, great. All right. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.